You know, I don't think we need to ban musical instruments in church, but if that means banning contemporary worship music along with it, then I'm all for it. Hey guys, welcome back to KingdomCraft, where we build churches in Minecraft while talking about Christianity. I can see this Presbyterian parrot is back over here, and today I'm gonna go mining while talking about the RPCNA, the Reformed Presbyterian Church in North America. It's one of those small conservative Presbyterian denominations. It's not part of the mainline PCUSA like I'm in, but the difference between this and the other conservative Presbyterian denominations like the PCA, the EPC, and the OPC is that this is not an offshoot because they technically never split off from anyone, at least not in America. They were just sort of founded several hundred years ago, and they stayed kind of small, and they simply did not unify with the rest of the mainline. But they didn't exactly split off either. So unlike the PCA, unlike the OPC, unlike the EPC, this conservative denomination can be called historic, even if they are very small. They're also very historic. They have a lot of historic rootedness. And you can also say they're probably the most conservative Presbyterian denomination in America. I think the Free Presbyterian Church of Scotland might be a little more conservative than them, but as far as Jungle Temple. As far as America is concerned, I think they definitely are the most conservative Presbyterian denomination, because not only are they completely against anything LGBTQ, anything relating to women's ordination for elders at least, but they also follow all the traditional Scottish Presbyterian worship practices that have been discarded by a lot of the other Presbyterian denominations, include whether PCA or OPC or PCUSA. They follow a lot of the traditional Presbyterian worship styles and worship regulations. So Presbyterians all follow what's called the regulative principle of worship, where we only do things in worship that the Bible tells us to do. But there are different levels of strictness that you could apply to this rule. So, for example, the Bible has psalms that say, to use musical instruments. But the psalms are in the Old Testament. There's no New Testament command to use musical instruments in worship. So moderate applications of the regulative principle, like you'll find in most PCA churches, would be like, yeah, musical instruments are okay because there is some precedent for it in the Old Testament, but a very, very strict application of the regulative principle, like in the RPCNA, would say since it's not explicitly commanded for us in the New Testament, we still shouldn't do it. So it's like a very strict application of the regulative principle. And another thing, in addition to a cappella singing, is the singing of exclusive psalmody, exclusively singing psalms and nothing else. So in RPCNA worship, the only type of music that is to be sung is a cappella psalms. That is, psalms where the only instrument is the human voice. No organs, no pianos, no guitars and drums. Now, I really do love organs in worship, but I absolutely despise guitars and drums because it just does not give a feel of sacred choir music. Because, our worship is meant to look like the worship described in the Book of Revelation. The Book of Revelation describes angel choirs. When you hear traditional church choir, it does really make you think of angel choirs. When you hear a contemporary worship band, it might be fun for some people. I think some people enjoy contemporary music more than traditional, the same way some kids enjoy McDonald's more than a fancy restaurant. But no one in their right mind would claim that a contemporary worship band sounds like heavenly angel choirs. It would just be sort of fun, a bit of a dopamine rush for some people who are into that. So I personally like organ music. I think organ functions well to aid a choir, but the choir is really the main sort of engine of the music. But like guitars and drums and like the contemporary worship style, that really doesn't have any sort of sacred choral feel to it at all. So if I had to choose between contemporary worship style and no instruments, I would choose the no instruments any day. And obviously the best music we could sing is the psalms. And I'm not someone who's strictly for exclusive psalmody, but generally the churches that don't do exclusive psalmody tend to like never do psalmody. So it's like ideally it would be like mostly psalms and occasionally there would be another hymn. But most of the time when churches are not very, very intentional about singing the psalms kind of just get neglected, and there is an explicit command in scripture to sing the psalms. The verse in the Bible goes like, sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual psalms. So some people interpret that to mean like, oh, the Bible says to do things other than psalms. And some Presbyterians would interpret the regulative principle that way. That's how I interpret it now. I'm open to changing my mind about that. But some people also think that the hymns and spiritual psalms are just synonyms for psalms, just like another way of saying psalms. So that is to say there's different interpretations of the regulative principle for Presbyterians. I came here to go mining, but I'm picking flowers instead. I came here to do a very masculine task. I'm doing a very feminine task instead. But, my church needs to be beautiful, so I need to get flowers for it as well. And I'm probably going to have to just go back home after getting these flowers and make a separate trip to go mining. That's probably how it's going to work. And there are so many flowers here. Wow, I did not expect there to be this many flowers that I would... Look, there's even more over here. Okay, I need to make a separate trip. I am stealing all the flowers from here, but that is okay. I am taking this back from my little sanctuary. Anyway... So two very obvious distinctive features about RPCNA worship is exclusive psalmody and a cappella psalms. Another thing is they would be very, very strict about the worship principles Westminster commands, the Westminster Confession, such as not having any images of God, not having icons in worship. Yes, Presbyterians are historically iconoclast, meaning we do not believe you should make any images of God, and you shouldn't use icons in worship. Now, it's okay to, have a picture of a person, have images of saints for, your own personal study or whatever, but you should not use images of anyone in worship, in public worship or private worship, I don't think. For example, it's not wrong to have pictures of other people. You have pictures of your family members. You could have pictures of saints or whatever, but you shouldn't use them in worship because either you're worshiping them or you're worshiping an image, both of which you shouldn't do. And, we believe as Presbyterians that we shouldn't have any images of God. I'm not here to defend that in this video. I have another video called Why I Am a Moderate Iconoclast. I have another video that explains my position on iconoclasm, which is the historic Presbyterian position. But if you go into an RPCNA church, because they're historic, a lot of RPCNA churches have traditional old buildings that are shaped like a church and have stained glass and all that, beautiful buildings. They're generally very small, so they won't be like big neo-Gothic mainline churches like you'll find in the PCUSA. They'll be small and humble white houses, often resembling Congregationalist churches. But at the same time, they'll have, beautiful stained glass. So my fiance and I recently visited an RPCNA church in rural Kansas. She's from Kansas. There's a lot of RPCNAs in Kansas, and I'll explain why in a second. The historical reason for that is actually really based. So this church had just purely symbolic decorative stained glass, no depictions of either God, including, Jesus, no depictions of Jesus, no depictions of any of the saints, but are just symbols like a crown representing Christ, and just nice decorations, colorful decorations on the windows. And on the windows, they had a plaque honoring every minister that served in that church, and it went back to 1800 something. And I had a very nice conversation with the pastor who preached a really great sermon. And I like how in RPCNA churches, the sermon is the central focus of the liturgy. Because I don't like how in, Anglican churches, especially high church Anglican churches, there's too much of a focus on scripted prayers, and the sermons are kind of like short little homilies. I think the sermon needs to be the main centerpiece. The sermon and the Eucharist, when the Eucharist is done, needs to be the main centerpiece of the worship service. Because the preaching of the word is what people go to hear. Scripted prayers are okay, but I think Anglicans rely on scripted prayers in, the Book of Common Prayer a little bit too heavily. And I like how RPCNA, as is a traditional Presbyterian thing to do, doesn't really rely that much on pre-scripted prayer. Okay, I'm going to pick all these flowers if I don't stop myself. I need to go back and deposit these, and then I'm going to go back out to actually go mining. So yeah, the sermon was really long, and the sermon was on Titus about what biblical womanhood looks like, and the pastor was very strong and unapologetic in denouncing the evils of feminism. Those were his exact words, while also saying that the biblical model for womanhood is not to be locked away inside the home. He mentioned that the Proverbs 31 woman did manage the household's finances outside of the home, and he also said that although the scripture tells wives to submit to their husbands, it doesn't tell husbands to force their wives to submit to them. So, like, a wife would be in sin if she doesn't submit to her husband, but if a husband has a rebellious wife, he would also be in sin if he tries to use force to make her submit to him. So he said that the Christian ethic on both sides, for both husbands and wives, is sort of mutual self-giving, and neither party should look out for their own self-interests really, but should yield to the interests of the other. Man, I am just in like a Minecraft paradise over here. I thought I was like in exile in this jungle when I had to flee from St. Athanasius Presbyterian Church. There's like so many resources here. Anyway, so the sermon was really good. My fiance and I both really loved it. We had a nice talk with the pastor afterwards, and when I told him I'm Redeemed Zoomer, he immediately recognized me. He was like, "You're that guy on Twitter." For some reason, even though Twitter is my smallest platform, that's the platform people tend to recognize me a lot from, which I'm kind of embarrassed by because I make some ad revenue off of YouTube. I try to keep my spicier takes off of YouTube. I try to save my most spicy takes for Twitter because Twitter is like the most free speech centered platform, and I feel like I'm kind of lost here. Okay, yeah, here's where I'm supposed to go. I'm supposed to go back home over here. But yeah, everything I saw in the RPCNA, I really liked. The one thing I was a little suspicious of was they only take communion quarterly, at least the one I went to. So, wait, did I just... Anyway, so yeah, everything I liked about it. I thought it was a bit suspicious that they only do communion quarterly, at least at the RPCNA church that I went to. But I think the reason they do that is because they are very careful about only letting people in good standing take communion. So I think if your reason for not doing communion frequently is because you don't care, that's bad. But if your reasoning for not doing communion frequently is because you do care, then that's very good. And it seems like the reason RPCNA churches often don't do communion very frequently is because they want to be very careful about who they allow to take communion. And that is a very good reason to not do it as frequently. I mean, I still would prefer doing it frequently. I'd say that's my biggest criticism of the RPCNA, is that infrequent communion. But from my experience, from the RPCNA pastors I've talked to, they generally have a much more properly reformed view of the sacrament of communion than, you know, your average PCA church, which might be kind of Presbyterian, might treat communion like it's just a symbol, whereas Presbyterians historically don't believe it's just a symbol. They believe it's the real presence of Christ. So there's a few reasons I really like the RPCNA. Everything I like about their worship is beautiful. They often have, you know, a very traditional, reverent style of worship. And, you know, a lot of times when I talk about churches needing to be pretty, people think I'm demanding that every church look like some Gothic cathedral, and I'm not. What I'm saying is churches should look beautiful, but in a humble sense. Kind of like the way a lot of RPCNA churches look like. They're, on the outside, just small white houses, but they still look beautiful. Humble isn't the opposite of beautiful. The opposite of humble is extravagant. I would say the average RPCNA church is humble, but very beautiful, and still has, like, stained glass and stuff, whereas Joel Osteen's megachurch, it's very extravagant. It's not humble at all, but it's also not beautiful. It's really ugly. So it's not like humility and beauty contradict each other. So yeah, I think the RPCNA is beautiful in terms of its architecture and its worship style. I think the humble exclusive psalmody a cappella is very, very reverent, and it manages to be beautiful without being like a performance, because it is a bit of a problem when worship becomes too much of a performance, but at the same time, I don't think that's an excuse to have, you know, cheesy music in worship either. So I think RPCNA really finds the best balance in terms of that. And if they're doing a cappella psalms, it's always going to be in like a classical style. And I've noticed that RPCNA congregations tend to be very well trained musically. And as a classical musician, I really appreciate that. When my fiance and I went there, they had this, you know, younger kid conducting the Not when I say younger kid, I mean is like a high schooler. They had this high schooler aged looking guy conducting everyone with his hand, so it was still purely a cappella. That's the closest they'll have to a worship team, I suppose. Another thing I like about the RPCNA, though, is its history. So, like I said, they never split off from anyone, so I immediately have much more respect for them than churches that, like, split off from the main line. Oh, there's a village here. Like the PCA or the EPC, so I already am a lot more partial towards them because of that. But at the same time, I'm gonna hoe this hay here. I feel like I'm on a Minecraft speedrun. Um, at the same time, they remained conservative. Even though they're technically mainline in that they've never split from anyone, they remained conservative. And they're very conservative. More conservative than like the PCA and the OPC, which did split off from things. So I already have a ton of respect for them for that. But also, their history is just really, really based and really impressive because they were on the right side of basically every historical church dispute. They're on the right side of them. Okay, I just attacked this iron golem, and now I am concerned because this iron golem is not doing anything. It's just standing there looking menacing. Okay, this is going to be very dangerous if this iron golem comes after me. I'm in big danger here. Is this lag? Is lag the reason why? Okay. But yeah, so they were on the right side of basically every church dispute. In the First Great Awakening, the Presbyterian Church is split into like Old Light and New Light. The mainline thing that would eventually become the PCUSA, it just split into like Old Light and New Light during that time, with New Lights supporting the First Great Awakening and Old Lights opposing it. But I think the RPCNA was pretty purely Old Light, and I made a video explaining why I'm Old Light, why I think the First Great Awakening ultimately did more harm than good, especially because the New Light people would evaluate ministers based on like how powerful their conversion experience was, whereas Old Lights would evaluate ministers based on how faithfully they adhere to the Westminster Confession of Faith, which I think is much better. And another dispute that they were definitely on the right side of, I mean, maybe some of you hyper-conservatives might disagree with me here, but I think that's kind of cringe. They were strongly abolitionist. The RPCNA is a very much a northern denomination, and northern is based because abolitionism and anti-slavery is based. They've always been an anti-slavery denomination. They were very heavily involved in the abolitionist movement against slavery. And that's why there's tons of RPCNAs in Kansas, because the history of Kansas is so based. Kansas is like the crusader state for abolitionists. It was literally founded, basically like bloody Kansas was like the civil war that Kansas had prior to the American Civil War, where a bunch of like New York Presbyterian, oh sorry I hit the villager, a bunch of New York Presbyterians and Congregationalists traveled to Kansas to crusade against slavery. A lot of people in Missouri were sort of the pro-slavery crusaders. There's a joke I tell. This joke was contributed to by the Redeem Zoomer Third Wheel. So I've been to Kansas because of my fiance more times than most New Yorkers can say they have, and I know a fact about Kansas most people don't. Because they're so old-fashioned in Kansas, they still haven't upgraded to color yet. They haven't upgraded to color. If you go to Kansas, everything's still in black and white. The Wizard of Oz, it's not because it's a black and white movie, because you know when they go to Oz, everything's in color. The only reason for that is because Kansas is still in black and white. Kansas has not upgraded to color. But if you go to Missouri, those people definitely do see color. But yeah, there's a reason the state Missouri sounds like misery. But no, Kansas is very based. Kansas was founded by abolitionist Christian fundamentalists, and many of them were RPCNA Presbyterians. So that means, although RPCNA is a very small denomination, it's got a lot of congregations in Kansas, and many of those congregations are like really old and historic, kind of like the one I visited. And yes, because RPCNA is small and they don't have that many resources, they do have a lot of, strip mall type church plants, which, I would always make fun of. But in addition to that, to supplement that, they have a lot of historic churches as well. So the reason they have these, strip mall church plants is not because they split off from anyone. It's just because they are very small. But they are doing what they can to expand, and I respect them for that. So I guess in conclusion, I would say the RPCNA is probably my favorite Presbyterian denomination these days. That's not the PCUSA. I used to say, like, ECO was my second favorite, but then I realized that In 2020, Eco got rid of the Scots Confession, and if you know me, you do not mess with the Scots Confession. So I really think that ideally, if I could snap my fingers and make the PCUSA turn into the RPCNA, meaning if I could make the PCUSA follow all the super strict standards of the RPCNA, I would. I think RPCNA Covenanters are doing basically everything they should do. Even if I might not have quite as strict standards as they would, I greatly respect what they're doing. I think they're serving God very, very faithfully. And I guess to conclude this video, I know that the Presbyterian pastor Matthew Everhart recently made a video criticizing some of the things I said, and I think he has another video coming out explaining that he appreciates my response to him, and he wants me to study at Reformed Presbyterian Theological Seminary, which is the seminary of the RPCNA, even though Pastor Matthew Everhart is not RPCNA, he's just a PCA pastor. And, if that's what God has planned for me, I wouldn't mind doing that because, I have my personal disagreements with Pastor Matt. I care a lot more about pretty buildings than he does, and I've criticized his views of the sacraments as being a bit too, Baptist influenced, a bit too Zwinglian. But I would still be happy to study in a seminary that is affiliated with the RPCNA because it's a very old historic seminary that is a very respectable institution. So yeah, I guess I am PCUSA, but I guess if I not only were to leave PCUSA, but if I could just choose any other denomination to be a part of, it might be RPCNA. I know it'd be a pretty radical jump from PCUSA all the way to RPCNA, but we have a lot more in common than you might think because both our denominations have old light tendencies. Both of our denominations are very traditional. Both of our denominations are technically mainline. So yeah, that's kind of why RPCNA might be my second choice if and when I leave the PCUSA, which I really don't want to do, but, it's getting harder and harder to stay orthodox within the PCUSA. I know I'll probably be the last one out. I'll probably be the last one off the sinking ship, but if the entire ship sinks, there's nothing I can do. So guys, that's about it for this video. I'm still going to be picking flowers, but thank you for watching, and I will see you guys later.